Okay, good morning.
Can you turn
The
my,
new,
thank you.
the new, newly named Operations Committee, now the Planning Committee. And it's Thursday morning. We've always met on Fridays forever, as long as I remember. So this is a change, but it should be a good change. So with that, can we get a roll call?
Yes, good morning. Director Diana Mayer,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
Vice Chair Ranjiv Kush,
Here.
Chair Larry Russell,
Here.
and out is Director Matt Sampson.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kush,
Aye.
Chair Russell.
Aye. Public comment on non-agenda items.
Yes, Phil Sauter, please.
Morning, Phil.
Good morning. I was concerned that folding demand management into the planning committee might bury it, but then realized that planning is exactly what our conservation effort needs. We've heard that conservation is neither predictable nor reliable, and now we have a chance to make it both of those things. Just as we plan for our other sources of water supply, we can also plan for conservation. The definition of planning is the process of thinking regarding the activities required to achieve a desired goal. So first we need a goal, and then we need some good and timely information to think about. During the past year, I've heard two explicit goals for conservation. One is a savings of 4 million gallons a day by the year 2045, and the other is a savings of 800,000 acre feet annually by the year 2030. And my own goal, for what it's worth, is 4 million gallons a day by 2030. The problem for me has been finding the data to support any of these goals. We can start with things that have been presented to the public and or are in the public domain. One data point is that a lawn requires 1.5 to 2 inches of water per week. If a 1 acre lawn gets 1.5 inches a week for 8 months out of the year, it needs 4 acre feet of water annually, or 1.3 million gallons a year. That's 5,400 gallons a day. For 2 months, that's 440 units of water, and the rate calculator shows a bi-monthly bill of $12,000, which is what some of Director Russell's poker pals pay. If the average residential customer uses 50 gallons per day, the 1.3 million gallons annually for a 1 acre lawn is equivalent to the indoor water use by 71 residential customers, and 2 inches of water a week for 8 months would cover 95 residential customers. For comparison, raising the Nicasio spillway delivers 3,000 acre feet of new storage, or 1 billion gallons. Conserving 4 million gallons a day of outdoor water is the equivalent of 4,500 acre feet of new storage. Banking that saved water would extend our current water supply by 3 months. And as we'll see in item number 4F, that's worth doing. It's no surprise that facts are the key to converting conservation from something that's unpredictable and unreliable to something that we can forecast, manage, improve on, and benefit from. But the last time we looked at lawns versus usage was 8 years ago. And that's how long it's been since we identified super users by area. And we haven't heard how our new rates have affected heavy users, or considered a surcharge versus the previous discount for summer use. Now that conservation is part of the planning committee, I request that we get the needed quality of information that we could use for useful planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
There are no further speakers.
Okay, great. Thank you for your thoughts. We need a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Director Mayer,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Kush,
Aye.
Chair Russell,
Aye.
and there are no comments for that.
Okay, great. Okay, San Geronimo Treatment Plant roof replacement. That's a long time coming.
Yes, it is. Good
I
morning.
can remember that one from 2004.
Good morning, Chair Russell, board members. Alex Nye, Engineering Director. Here with me this morning is our Assistant Engineer, Hagar Nagash, who's been working on this job feverishly for quite some time now, but we're now ready to bring
She
it to
doesn't
you.
look like a carpenter.
But she's here to present this item this morning. So Hagar?
Okay. Good morning, Director. Sam Hakarnagash, Assistant Engineer and Design.
Good morning.
Good morning. This morning, I'm here to present the San Geronimo Treatment Plant Roof Replacement Project. This project is located at San Geronimo Treatment Plant in unincorporated area of Whitaker. This project will replace the existing leak-prone roof membrane, which was last replaced in 2004 with a new Class A fire-rated thermoplastic polyethylene TPO roofing membrane. This project will address the current issues with the ongoing leaks and dry rot issues while enhancing fire protection as part of the district's capital improvement program. The new roof will also include a cover board beneath the membrane, which would allow for a potential future solar panel installation. In addition to the roof replacement, the project also includes the installation of guardrails around the perimeter of the roof at the treatment plant and Nord Marin pipeline pump station to provide fall protection for personnel working on the roof. The engineer's estimate for this project is $1.5 million and is scheduled to last 120 days with the completion date of August 2025. District will receive and open bids for this project in early April. If bid documents are acceptable, staff will make recommendations at a future regularly scheduled board meeting for contract award. The staff recommended action is for review and referral to the board with the planning committee's recommendation to proceed with the project. Thank you.
I thought you were going to say it's going to last 120 years. I'm going to say, well, that's one hell of a roof.
I hope not.
Okay, questions?
Yeah, just one clarification. The roof that's being replaced in this project, that is also where we're looking at possible solar panel installation. Is it the same structure?
Yes, that's correct. It's the same structure.
That's the roof structure over the operations building. The clear wells are separate to that, but we're looking at those as separately.
You're right.
So it's a
That's what I
combination of
thought.
both of those. Yes.
Okay,
So I just briefly, my thought on this project is it's an interesting illustration of the benefit to the organization of the changes made recently to the rate structure in the rates that allowed this project that, as Director Russell noted, for kind of 20 years has been talked about in, buckets when it rains in an operating center. But it did reflect to some extent the state of where we were with our investment capabilities and resources. So I'm really appreciative to the board. We're able to move forward with these sorts of projects and get past buckets and control rooms and, all the, what that means to staff besides the degradation of the facility.
It's the only building in Marin that I've been that has more buckets than the Civic Center. And I was a little confused by the fact that you said it was helped fire resistance. Is it, doesn't the PVC burn?
Our TPO roof is a Class A roof, which is the highest rated roof. Let's see, it lasts about like 2 to 4 hours before ignition. So it was the higher rated roof that staff went with for this project.
And also to add to that, when we were looking at the roof structure itself, it's a concrete over steel slab roof. So that provides that measure of fire hardening as well. So the TPO membrane over is really just to keep the water from going into the building and into the buckets and going out. So, and it does have that high 2-hour rating, which means that ember falls on it. It has to burn for at least 2 hours before it burns through. So it's really, really a good roof.
Yeah, good. How much is it going to cost?
About $1.5 million.
$1.5 million.
Yeah, that's a good roof.
Yeah.
That's a big building
Yes, it is.
and long overdue. Are we doing anything special to make the solar compatible with it?
Well, we're putting that underlayment structure that would allow for a ballast system for the solar panels to be installed later on the roof if we
Good.
decide to go that way. So we're thinking about that as well.
Good. Yeah, I know I have a steel roof and had that, parts of it are changed so that
Right.
it's solar ready.
Yeah. So this will be ready when we go down that route.
Cool. Okay,
so Alex, just on that point though, we'll decide between the operations building versus the clear wells for solar panels. We may do both.
That's to be
That's
discussed.
all being evaluated currently.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
as long as you don't mind a return on investment of 25 or 30 years with a new payment structure. It's a very long, slow payment back, but it's a heavy power user, so makes sense.
Correct.
Okay. I need a motion to refer it to the board.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
And there are no comments.
Okay. I was going to get to that. Thank you. Alpine barge anchor and pipe float replacement project.
Okay, it's still me. So this morning with me, it's also Ava Prejon, our assistant engineer, who'll be presenting this item on the Alpine barge. We have a presentation for this. So share screen. Where is Alpine barge?
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
that one or this one? It's on.
All right. Good morning. Thank you for having me. My name is Ava Prejon. Today I will be presenting the Alpine Barge Anchor and Pipe Float Replacement Project. This is a capital improvement project located in the Alpine Reservoir in Marin County. To start with an agenda, we'll give background, project scope of what we'll be doing and recommended actions. To give some background, at the Alpine Reservoir, we have two 200 horsepower Alpine pumping barges that have been in operation since 2009 and one 125 horsepower emergency pumping barge that has been in operation since 1989. When in operation, they pump water through 5,300 feet of 24-inch welded steel pipe and 30-inch HDPE pipe from the Alpine Reservoir to the Bontempi Reservoir to be treated at the Bontempi treatment plant. The Alpine barges are critical to the district's infrastructure as they are the primary source of providing raw water to be treated at the Bontempi treatment plant. So the scope of work. The scope of this project is to replace the deteriorating anchoring system with 4 new 1,000-pound cast iron mooring anchors at the pumping barges and 2 new 1,000-pound cast iron mooring anchors at the emergency barge. The installation of the new anchors will prevent the barges from drifting while in operation. We will also be replacing buoys with new pipe floats on the span of pipe between the pumping barges and the manifold barge. These floats are designed to elevate the 22-inch HDPE pipe by 50%, alleviating stress at the connection points between the pumping barges and the manifold barge. The pipe floats will also suspend barge electrical conduit, preventing water exposure, which will reduce the potential for electrical failure. As a whole, this project design will reduce the amount of staff time required for maintenance and increase the operational reliability of the water transmission system. So in conclusion, the engineer's estimate is $50,000 plus a 20% contingency of $10,000. The project duration is 90 days with the completion date in June of this year. And if all bid documents are acceptable, staff will make a recommendation at a regularly scheduled board meeting for contract award. And the recommended action is for review and referral to a future regular meeting of the board of directors with the planning committee's recommendation to proceed with the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. That's very interesting. Why do we have such a long transmission line? Because the two reservoirs are adjacent. Does it have to do with the depth?
That is correct. So it's always ideal and optimal to pull from the deepest part of the reservoir. That's why the barges are in those locations strategically, to pull from that deeper pool.
Right. And during droughts, obviously the water recedes away from
Yes.
Bontempi, from the dam, right?
That is correct.
Right. Right. During summer, taste and odor issues, for example, algae tend to be closer to the surface, sunlight. So you pull from the depth, you maintain your higher quality.
Have you seen that stuff where they put the black tarps around structures like the pump stations to keep the motile algae from swimming in? They won't come in if there's no light.
Hmm.
There's a AWA paper on it. It's pretty interesting. They basically just build around it, and it keeps them from wanting to be there.
Hmm.
So something to think about. Any other questions?
All good. Thank you.
I have a question for you. How are you going to place those 1,000-pound anchors? Do you know yet?
We got a pretty good idea. We're going to be using barges with davit cranes to actually
And
lift
how
it
do you
up.
get the barge into the reservoir?
Well, that's going to be a
Clog 'em
contractor's
muscle
means of
special, huh?
methods.
It's gonna be
Sometimes
tricky, huh?
there are some barges that are actually modular that can be built on site, so it's smaller sections.
I
loaded
wouldn't
up.
be surprised he's a helicopter. That's all I would do if I was going to do it.
Yeah, that's
You know, he can, you dump him on the shore and he gets a helicopter in 25 minutes, he's done.
yeah. Well,
But I wouldn't surprise me. Because
They're also inflatable buoys, right? You could float them out.
you could,
And,
but the
and then,
problem is there's no way easy to get in the reservoir.
Yeah.
It's not built to launch things, you know. In fact, it's built not to launch things.
well, we do have boat access ramps, but we'll have to or the contractor will have to navigate around those and make it work with what we have.
Helicopter. That's
That's
my
an
bet.
option.
Sounds expensive. Yeah, it could be a little light on there, your 50,000. But who's going to make those anchors?
Those are, yes.
So we're using cast rigging, an internal source. Mhm.
What does that mean?
So it's a company we actually use to make the valve caps.
I see.
So
Cool. They're here?
yes, I think in Berkeley, Alameda.
Yeah, Bay Area, they're local
Mhm.
company. Yeah,
So it's old Toyotas.
probably smelted down and poured into.
So what
Dutch
AV&I
technology.
uses old Toyotas.
No. I didn't say that.
Lead won't be there. It'll burn off. But
Yeah,
yeah, it'll be interesting.
yeah, it's a good project. It's
Are we buying those?
yes,
Oh, okay.
we're procuring all the materials, so that way it's a quicker installation time.
What do those little gems cost?
What was the cost on
Couple
those?
grand?
I know total for all 6, it was close to 30,000.
30. Wow. More than I thought.
Yeah.
Inflation,
Steel's expensive too. so.
especially with the tariff. Okay. Public comment?
There are none.
Okay. Can I get a motion?
so moved.
Second.
Thank you. Okay. You're in the hot seat, Alex.
Thank you.
Trying to grow roots.
Nicasio Spillway.
All right. Well, this morning we have quite a lineup of folks here today with us to present this item. We've got Alicia Irish and Jonathan here to present. We'll be presenting on this Nicasio Spillway Modifications Project Update. And we have a presentation PowerPoint this morning as well.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're here today to give you an update on the Nicasio Spillway Modification Project. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Wrong file.
You're just trying to confuse us. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
easy to do.
That one says Nicasio Update.
Here we go. All right, here we go. We're ready. So this morning we'll be giving you a project background, going over design considerations for the project, reviewing our approach for the environmental review, permitting and engagement, and then going over next steps for this project. So the two main drivers for this project are, of course, the 2021 drought that we experienced, and also kind of forecasting climate change and how the weather will be impacted by that. And out of the 2021 drought, we initiated, as you know, the Strategic Water Supply Assessment in 2022. This process took a little over a year, and then in May of 2023, the board approved this study. And it looked at various alternatives to increasing our water supply resiliency, such as optimization, using what we have in a better way if we can, reuse, desalination, improved conveyance, both at within our service area and also at a regional level. And then it also looked at local surface storage, going over various alternatives such as a new dam raises, and then spillway improvements or modifications. The consultant team, and as well as the water resources staff, looked at various spillway modification projects across our 7 reservoirs. And 4 rose to the top of the list. And of that, Nicasio very much kind of floated to the top. due largely to the fact that when it was originally installed, the engineers at the time thought of modifying this spillway and built the dam in such a way to accommodate for a future spillway modification raise. You can actually see in this photo on the right the various anchors that they installed for a future sort of flashboard manual spillway modification. This dam was originally installed in 1961, so this project, I guess you could say, has been on the books since then. Modifying the spillway, the main goal is to increase the resiliency of our water supply in a short order. The project right now is estimating that approximately 3,000 acre feet could be added to this reservoir with the spillway modification. And now we'll go over some design considerations.
Does the watershed have the ability to fill it?
Yes, so in 8 out of 10 years, Nicasio spills. So
Same as
most
Southside.
times, yeah. So we're looking, and the various alternatives have different raises to the spillway, and of course, different storage as associated with that. So Seeger Dam, which is the dam at Nicasio Reservoir, is a 275-foot long side channel. So this is a little bit different than some of the other reservoirs that we have or that you may have seen before. This goes over the side as opposed to just across the face of the dam. It does have a trapezoidal chute that you can see in this photo here and a flip to stream channel. There's various considerations that the engineering team is looking at for this spillway modification, from a permanent crest raise, and then a couple of different variations of gates, an inflatable gate, which is kind of like one big inflation, and then regulating gates or radial gates, which would be several gates adjacent to each other across the face of the spillway, or across the top of the spillway, excuse me. And so we've contracted with Black & Veatch back in July of 2024. We've been working diligently on this project, gathering information, performing hydrologic studies, and then looking at the alternatives. We're currently in the alternatives analysis process, and we're also performing ground motion studies and stability analysis for the dam, because to show the DSOD that a spillway that the dam can handle such an increase, we have to also show that the dam is stable. So we're meeting regularly with DSOD, who's the approving authority for any dam or spillway modification project. And we are currently on schedule to have our 30% design completed in the late spring of this year. Now going over our approach for environmental and stakeholder engagement. This fall, we entered into a contract with Environmental Science Associates, or ESA, to assist with our environmental review process, regulatory permitting, and fisheries studies in Nicasio Creek, which is the 1 mile of creek between the dam and the confluence with Lagunitas Creek. To aid in this effort, we have ongoing data collection happening across many different aspects. One is the Nicasio Creek hydrology, the Nicasio Creek fishery study, including freshwater shrimp along with that study, cultural resource assessment, wetland delineation mapping, assessment and mapping of various endangered species, and then the northern spotted owl surveys, which we've seen have impacted various construction windows for different projects along the watershed. Now I'm going to pass this off to Jonathan to go over some of the species that we're seeing there.
Yeah, morning, directors. Jonathan Kaler, Fisheries Program Manager. Good to see you. So as you know, Nicasio is part of the Lagunitas Creek watershed, and we have these 3 species that we spend a lot of time focusing on monitoring and restoring habitat for them. And yeah, the coho salmon, which is state and federally endangered, steelhead, which is federally threatened, and then the California freshwater shrimp, which is both state and federally endangered. And this stretch of Nicasio Creek also has the potential to support California red-legged frogs, foothill yellow-legged frogs, and pond turtles. It's not really known whether those are present, but we're having ESA look for those in case they are present, and we need to incorporate that into the permitting process.
Aren't the shrimp and the salmonids kind of natural enemies?
No, they get along pretty well. Yeah, in
They're,
Lagunitas
they're
Creek.
too big.
Yeah, they kind of spatially
big to eat.
separate, you know,
Yeah.
the shrimp are up in the
Yeah.
banks and the fish not so much. So Nicasio Creek is only a mile. As you can see here, it's this relatively straight, short stretch in a canyon. Habitat's quite limited. We're having ESA look at what habitat conditions are there and help inform just all of our negotiations and discussions with the agencies. Historically, when the dam was built, there was a release requirement that was transferred to Kent. So there was an amount of water that was then applied to higher releases in Lagunitas Creek. And the rationale at the time is that the water coming out of Nicasio is generally too warm, low in dissolved oxygen, and high in turbidity. Those are all sort of bad things for salmonids, for the fish that we're trying to protect or restore here. And I think that's, yeah.
So that kind of gives an idea as to some of the considerations that we'll need to take into account when designing and moving forward with this project. There's also a number of resource agencies that we're working with to move this project forward, and we'll need a number of permits from all of these agencies. In addition to the resource agencies, we're also working with the Federated Indian Tribe of Greyton Rancheria. We're reaching out to them and meeting with them later this month. And also we'll be following the AB 52 process as it follows CEQA.
How does Grayton fit into it?
As part of any project to comply with CEQA, you're mandated through AB 52 to work with the tribe of that area. In our case, that is the Federated Indians of Greyton Rancheria.
So it is not the Miwoks, or they are, or the Miwoks. Or do we know?
They may be in the area, but the AB 52 consultations are specific to those tribes that have requested to be on the list for consultation purposes. So that's what we
Cool.
would adhere to.
Well, maybe they'll throw some money into.
We're also working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for a Section 404 permit. In order to obtain that permit, we'll also need biological assessments from the National Marine Fisheries Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In addition, the Regional Water Quality Board of Engineers will be obtaining a 401 water quality certification with them. And then finally, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Section 1600, in compliance with the California Endangered Species Act.
Any concerns about getting the 404?
I think as we go through this process, which I'll go into in just a second, I think, you know, that'll just be one of many things that we need to obtain.
Interesting.
So we took all of the resource agencies out to the site at the end of January, and we'll be conducting follow-up meetings with this group every 6 weeks. Similarly, with the members of the Lagunitas TAC that are interested in this project, we took them out on a site visit on February 5th, and we'll be doing a similar follow-up meeting schedule with them about every 6 weeks. We are currently assessing the upstream impacts. Or just on note on those meetings, they were very productive. There was a lot of questions asked, and the concerns raised were ones that we anticipated. So there was no real surprises, both on the upstream and downstream impacts, mostly related to the protected species that we just described. So we're also currently assessing the upstream impacts to determine the potentially affected landowners. We're also reaching out to the Nicasio Landowners Association to present at a future association board meeting that will be taking place later this month. And also, like I mentioned, we have initial meeting with the Federated Indians in February, and another AB 52 meeting later this spring. So next steps for this project, we are moving along as fast as we can. We have a lot of dedicated staff, as well as working with very qualified consultants. So we're looking to advance the design to 30% for a DSOD submission in late spring. We'll be continuing our coordination meetings with the agencies and interested parties for this project. And then we'll be advancing the environmental assessments in preparation of an environmental review and permit applications. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. Questions?
Alicia, you didn't say much about the selection of the actual spillway design.
Cor-
Is that that's probably the
That's
still?
where we are now. So, we're working, we have a large internal group that we meet with, I think, I think it's every 2 weeks, but we end up meeting most weeks anyway. And we're digging through the various pros and cons of the various alternatives. We have different criteria that we're evaluating all of the alternatives against, which are in line with the criteria that's being used for the other water supply projects. There's things like cost per acre foot, there's design and construction risk, regulatory permitting risk. You know, we want to make a project that's implementable in a timely fashion, because we know that we want to increase the resiliency before another drought occurs. So we're not quite at the selected alternative phase yet, but we'll be coming back to the board.
Yeah, we'll be coming back to share that. And as you can imagine, our kind of criteria broadly is, right, maximize how much water and at the same time get it done quickly. So there's some tension in that, as you can imagine, as we go through it, but nonetheless, it's an interesting process. I think the board will appreciate the thought process that we're bringing to it and where we ultimately land, but we'll bring that back for sure to the board.
Got it. It's really helpful to see all of the different permitting requirements that are necessary for this. I think it gives us all a better understanding of what's involved, even in what I think we would consider a smaller sized infrastructure project. I know there's going to be a lot of, there is a lot of uncertainty maybe on how all the permitting proceeds. And then there's, of course, still the design that you mentioned. Do you have any ballpark sense of when construction might start?
So we're still on the schedule that I had previously presented, to have all approvals and permits in hand midway through 2026.
Midway through 2020.
So
Then
in
about
order
a
to get
year.
there, we need to complete our environmental review process. That's needed to apply for some of these permits, and then continue working with the agencies closely throughout the design process. So there's no surprises, right, when the applications are submitted.
Great. Thank you.
Anything?
Yeah, thanks for the report. Looking forward to the next iteration showing kind of clear path on timeline, any updates on approvals needed and pushback that you're getting, the cost of the project, and then, acre feet that we think this will help us generate, especially if there are options. So following up on those three would be great. Super excited about this project. Thank you.
Yeah, as you're probably well aware, watch out for the 404. I've been involved in several of them, and they're pretty complex. Maybe not so much anymore, who knows? But I strongly encourage you to look hard at the rubber dam, because LA Water and Power has had one since the 60s on the LA River, and they're unbelievably slick. If you get an exciting event where there's too much water, it just goes over the dam and the dam collapses with the siphon. Just the siphon works backwards and out the water goes and the dam goes down, and you end up with something that's about this high. LA's is pretty big, probably the length of this building, maybe even longer. And it's operated flawlessly for, like I say, for.
Isn't there one on the Russian River in Guerneville? Some type of rubber.
They inflate to create a water pool kind of late, maybe mid-late in the summer.
Right.
They typically inflated so they have water for the rainy collectors.
I thought that
I
was.
think there's a recreation benefit too.
I thought that's what the sandbar did. Yeah, but they're slick. And the nice part about them is foolproof. They're nothing to them. They just collapse when they need to collapse and get out of the way, more or less. I mean, there's still head loss, but not too much. So anyway, okay. Can I get a motion, public comment?
Yes, Bill Sauter.
Last week I was lucky enough to attend the Lagunitas Creek Technical Advisory Committee field trip out to the spillway to learn about the project. It was really impressive to hear presentations from Jonathan, Sean, and Alicia. I was amazed at the amount of information Alicia crammed into a 3-minute summary, and I looked and she was not using any notes. It was clear that all of the Water District folks knew everything about this project in detail and exactly how it fits into the district's plans. I'm looking forward to the day that we'll hear a planning committee presentation on demand management that has the same detail and specificity on achieving our goals. I think it would be good for the Marin water community to have as much information as possible on such an important shared goal. And thank you again to the presenters and to the folks who arranged that tour to the spillway. It was really informative. And by the way, if you can get out there, the pathway along the spillway, there's like a mile-long path that we took. It's really beautiful. If you haven't been on that trail and look at the environment, it's just incredible out there. It's worth a trip. Thanks.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for taking the time. Oh, now I forgot what my question was. Something about the timing. Oh, well, I'll catch you next time. Okay, you need a motion to forward it.
For referral to the,
It's
to the
information.
information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not so obvious on the agenda. Okay, Pine Mountain.
Okay, Alex and I, engineering director, still here. So here for this item, it's this project's been a long time in the making, that replacement of Pine Mountain Tunnel. So Pine Mountain Tunnel is over 100 years old, about 1.5 miles long. It's used to convey about 3 million gallons of water to about 23% of our service area, the Ross Valley area. So need a replacement long overdue. And early on, when we were doing the water system master plan in 2020, we identified the need to focus on this, and we're able to identify the ideal optimal location for the new tank construction, which is on Concrete Pipe Road. So that location matches up hydraulically. It was ideal for the new construction with very minimal additional infrastructure needed to construct. But given the size and the location, it was decided to turn it into a 2-phase approach, because the first approach was to excavate, remove all the earth, 45,000 cubic yards, install the soil now, and the second phase would be to construct the 2 million-gallon pre-stressed concrete storage tanks. So the district went into full design mode, got the project ready, advertised out to construction, and actually awarded the contract to commence construction August 1st of 2023. And I'm happy to report today that the first phase of that construction has been completed and has really set the foundation for the second phase, which we've already advertised the second phase of construction this past month, and which is great. So we're on time, keeping things moving forward. Another thing that we recognize as we were going into the second phase of construction, since this phase 2 is spanning over 4 years, with lots of complexities as far as submittal review, and there's just a lot that's going to go into really focusing and making sure this project is moving smoothly. So we recognize the need that we also needed some construction management support to move this forward. So if our construction management team had no other projects on their plate, this might be something they could tackle, but they currently have a pretty good full workload. And as you heard, we got a couple of more projects coming in, and kind of looking into the engineering crystal ball in the next couple of months, we'll be coming back with Castagna Pump Station, the Fairfax Manor Pump Station, along with a whole series of pipeline projects over the next 6 months. And then later on in the summer, we're going to be coming back with Hine Tank replacement, which is kind of a mini Pine Mountain Tunnel to replace those 2 redwood tanks and a small retaining wall, as well as a Tokoloma pump station. So we're going to have a lot of work coming in. So we're going to need that support to keep this big multi-year project moving forward. So as a result, staff put out an RFP for construction management support for this project as well, and estimated around 10% of the contract cost, which is going to be estimated right around $1.7 million for the construction management contract. So, and proposals for that will be due this month. So kind of going back to the actual main PMT tank replacement phase 2, the engineer's estimate for that project is $17,810,000, which will be spanning over 4 years. with a contingency of about $1.9 million over the life of this project. Bids for that project will be opening on March 4th, and we're looking to come back at a future board date for award of the contract. So the recommended action is to review and refer to a future board meeting for the award of Pine Mountain Tunnel Tanks Phase 2, as well as a separate construction management contract in support of this project. And I'm glad to take any questions.
All good. Congrats.
Thank you.
Alex, the construction management contract, so that's a more recent addition to the project, or
That is correct. The first phase we did in-house, and it was a smaller of the two phases of construction, but yet very complicated. And that only lasted 2 years. Now, this project is more complex as far as looking at design submittals and constant coordination with the contractors, subcontractors, and staff, going over payment requests. There's lots that goes on behind the scenes to manage large, complicated projects like this. So this is a new thing for us that we need to make sure we progress with this project forward on time.
right. And it'll add about 10% to the overall cost of phase 2.
That is correct.
And these will be separate bids for.
Yes, the construction is a separate bid, and the RFP is a proposal for services, professional services, two separate things. So there'll be two separate items in the future.
Yeah, we've been talking about options for managing the ambitious level of capital improvement that we
Right.
have lined up.
Right.
This seems like a good step in that direction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thanks for bringing this to us.
Is the project big enough to draw bigger contractors than are normal?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. DN Tanks is definitely one of the ones in there looking at them. Shimmick Construction, just looking at the plan holders list online. Some of the bigger players out there that do this kind of work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's guys that build these tanks.
Correct.
Yeah.
It really is a specialty kind of construction for these pre-stressed tanks.
Is this our first ones?
First pre-stressed concrete tank that I'm aware of, yes.
Yeah, I think so.
We have other concrete tanks, but I don't know if they're pre-stressed. Might be different type of concrete construction, but this is the first
They've been
one.
pre-stressed for a long time.
Well,
Pretty stressed.
Pre-stressed.
pre-stressed.
You can pull the steel in the East Bay Mud, of course, knows all about those.
Mhm.
They had a little problem with their digester tanks there by the intersection with 580 and 80.
Oh,
More than a little problem. If you look at them, they've got external pans on the outside
oh, wow.
because the internal rebar corroded.
It corroded away. Mhm.
Yeah, the cables. Yeah. So they had a little issue. But yeah, we'll be pleased with those because your maintenance is so much lower.
Mhm. Yeah, these will be great tanks when they're constructed, and then we'll be able to focus on, the decommissioning of the tunnel and then doing some other pumping improvements for Scott Pump Station to relocate it. So there's other stuff that will be coming up in the next couple of years.
Probably have to build bat habitat on top of them
We'll
so they get used to it.
looking into all
On that
options.
point, Alex, we don't have a plan yet for decommissioning of the tunnel, right?
No, we've already thought about that, and with this 4-year window, we're going to start looking at that and getting something ready. So that way, when January 31st, 2029 rolls around and we commission the tanks, then we could really move into that phase of decommissioning in 2030 and beyond. So it's really, when you look at the entirety of the project, start to finish, it's probably going to be a 10, 12-year project with all the phases of construction, planning, design, construction, decommissioning, and everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
2029 was a long time.
Yeah. And that's mostly due because of the northern spotted owl. So we really have that
Oh, you only
constricted
get
time
half that,
window.
huh?
And then you factor in red flag warnings during the optimal peak summer construction months and then rain. So your time window really starts compressing quite a bit, and it makes it really exciting to try to get things done fast.
Especially for the contractor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it takes a little luck.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. Can we get a motion to refer?
So moved.
Second. Thank you.
Any public comment?
Referred.
There are none.
Okay, great.
Without it.
Drought update? I love having discussions about drought when it's raining. Very fitting.
Yes.
Like there are too many chairs up here.
So this is the first planning meeting. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
It is. It's history in the making.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, I'll
I'm
take,
sure we'll all remember it.
right, next week. Yeah, good morning, members of the board, public, Paul Cellier, Water Resources Director. At the request of the board, we're bringing this item, which is the title we've come up with is drought response options. And the thinking is, what would we be able to do if the drought were to occur tomorrow, next week? Where are we in terms of our
I
water
take that
supply?
bet.
Yeah, I would too at this point.
Mhm.
Reservoirs are looking good. So, so today we have, this is what we've brought as our, how would we respond today to a drought? What are our options out there? So, Lucy's going to talk us through, the sort of, operational items that we can, think about doing that might help our water supply in the very, very short term. And then the water shortage contingency plan, and then I'll pick up on emergency drought projects.
Thank you. Morning, Board of Directors. So with operations, this is usually the first initiative that we take on as a district. Before we ask our customers to conserve, we look at all the actions we can take as a district internally when it starts to become dry and dry transitions to could transition into a drought. So we look at what actions can we take. The last few years we've been front loading Sonoma water. And so what that allows us to do is really take as much water from Sonoma and import through the winter months and then through the entire fiscal year that we can take water from Sonoma. So if dry conditions were able to turn into a drought, we would be able to take our max available from Sonoma. So that's one key aspect of our operations. Also, we look at maximizing our recycled water use within the service area, not just those that have it to their house or to their facility within the Terra Linda area, but also setting up a residential fill station and truck hauling. So making sure that program is up and available to customers. And then also setting up and mobilizing the temporary generators and piping that's needed in order to convey water from our more offline reservoirs, Phoenix and Suluhuli, which aren't connected directly into our treatment plants right now. So those we would mobilize the piping and generators needed to get the water to our treatment plants and out to our customers and
Have you
maximize that
seen-
water.
Have you seen City of Santa Rosa's connections? They're in the parking lot of where the WAC meeting is. They have one fire hydrant, which is potable water, and 15 feet away, I'll take a picture the next time I'm there. 15 feet away is the recycled water,
Mhm.
and they both have eddy meters on them. So the contractors can come at their own volition and pick up the water as they wish.
Mhm.
And I don't know what they do. I guess they write the eddy
Yeah.
meter readings down.
It's the same for ours as well. For
But
the
it's open all
recycle,
the time.
same with ours for the contractors that are within our truck hauling program, and that's the commercial truck hauling program for recycled. If they are trained throughout, it doesn't have to be a drought at any point in time.
And where is that?
That's through the
It says-
Terra Linda area. So any of the
Oh, in
hydrants.
Terra Linda.
Yeah,
Okay.
so we have hydrants that are called out that they can go and it's
Put their meter
metered.
on.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
That's good.
yeah, it's a great resource.
I was thinking about our friends at Ross Valley.
Yeah. So within that area, but they have to be trained and it's an annual system. So in addition, we also look at ways to minimize any kind of water quality flushing unless it's necessary. We try to minimize that amount and also prioritize all the leaks that we find and really try to minimize any loss of water from our system.
How much use do we have on that system, on the recycle?
Right now, we're between 650 to 700 acre feet per year.
As Paul knows, my neighbor has been very active in trying to get the water. Can he get arranged to hook into that? Is it possible?
So if it's the same person, I think it is.
It is.
With
Moses.
the yacht club, yeah.
Yeah.
So we did talk with him, and Carrie's group actually met with him,
Yeah.
and they he was in tier 4 and sort of suffering. So we met with him, went through a sort of a cap review, and his bills, I think, got greatly reduced.
Oh,
We
good.
also tried to make him available for him to participate in the truck hauling system by helping train him, because I think he had a trailer with a tank or something
Yeah,
that he
something
wanted
like
to
that.
use. So Noel from our recycled water supervisor, he met with him, and it sort of dropped off, and then the rains happened. So
Yeah,
we
I
didn't-
I remember I mean, he's next door, so,
Yeah.
I see him like once a week, how's that going, Hmm.
yeah, we're happy to pick up where we left off with him. if
Okay,
need be.
I'll rattle his cage again.
Lucy, before you move on, under drought operations, the first item is purchase maximum available water from Sonoma during winter months. Now, I know later in the presentation, you're going to get to the conveyance options for increasing our ability to use winter water. But right now, in the absence of improved or different conveyance or new conveyance, our ability to bring water down in the winter months it's not limited by our contract, which I think goes up to 14.3.
Correct.
It is it's the amount we can use in the system at that time.
Yeah, and as much as is available from the north as well.
It's
So-
availability, but probably that exceeds our ability to use Sonoma water in the winter right now.
Correct.
And
Do we-
certainly in the first year of a drought.
In the first year of a drought.
Because Sonoma's resources are larger than ours, so we would expect that they would, enter sort of allocation mode across the summer. So
Summertime.
Lucy talked about front loading. That's that June through December period where we're front loading the Sonoma water supplies. And then that allows us to, as in today, if we had a very dry start of this year, we've already taken close to 5,000 or 4,500 acre feet of our Sonoma minimum allotment. We could continue at a high rate were it dry through, to the end of June. And so that's what this is talking about in that first year of a drought. And then as winter months, as you go into the drought, then winter months, you try to maximize that Sonoma purchases.
Just be aware of the downside, which is that if you start spilling,
Of course.
it's
of
not the
course.
same water, but it's the same
Of course.
cost.
Yeah.
It's $1,100-$1,200 an acre foot going over the spillway.
But if we were to, theoretically, if we were not to use our reservoir supplies and try to, exclusively rely on Sonoma water, how much of that could we use right now, given the limitations of our network and,
We've established about an 8 million gallon a day.
it's about 8,000 acre feet
Yes.
in a year. That's what we could maximally use.
The 8 million gallons a day is our minimum sort of wintertime quantity of water that we could take. So again, focusing on that time period, there's this sort of mismatch as to when water is available and high demand occurs. So
Right.
that's the advantage of storage for us. And
Of course, of
Yeah.
course.
And we've seen in drought years taking as much as around 8,900 acre feet, around just under 9,000 acre feet. So for that like dry year, that's about where we get to.
That's sort of the upper limit of what.
Yeah,
we've been able
based
to
on our
bring.
system capacity and where we can move water
Mer-
and consume it. So-
Got it.
Yeah, those of us who live on the east side of the system, Tiburon, Belvedere, always get Russian River water,
Right.
more or less.
Right.
So
Can I ask a question too? So what is the philosophy behind front loading, given that we often spill out of our reservoirs?
So front loading is this idea that we don't obviously know that we're going to spill. And we know we have a minimum take or pay for the 5,300. So while we can use that water during high demand, the June through roughly October time period where demands are relatively high, we try to purchase as much Sonoma water as we can of that 5,300. At some point, we dial back, probably sometime in December, depending on how successful we've been in pulling in that water, and try to assess either from rainfall, storage levels, and just general forecast data. Is the big blob out in the Pacific? Is the ridge out there blocking storms in January? Do we continue this strategy of pulling in as much Sonoma water, or do we back off, as in this year we have done? We've sort of backed off of pulling in.
I mean,
Sonoma
but
water.
part of it is you're limited with how much you can bring in over time, right? Based on the plant,
Hydraulically.
the pumping system. So if you
Okay.
think about a dry year where you really want to maximize what you're bringing in, you have to start early.
Got it. Okay.
So that, and you have to do it anyway with a take or pay. But yes, the tension is you got a big, rains coming in December, January, and all that water you've bought goes over. Then if it doesn't rain, you're like, dang it, now is when, so that then maybe you buy more to fill up right before the summer. But that the question really does reflect that tension that always exists of buying the insurance policy and at what cost versus the risk.
It's an excellent question. Yeah, as they said, there's a downside to it, and that's the downside. But there's a downside both ways. You can't back up. So there's no way to, if you let it, don't take it, there's no way to get back and say, oh, we need to take more because we're just hydraulic limited. So it's a tough bet on that they go through each time thinking about this and going, but I think this is a pretty safe, we've developed this over the last 20 years or so, a little different strategy than was in place before. To address exactly this issue, because like I say, you can't pack up, so you can't catch up. You're dead in the water.
So moving into drought, thinking about drought response, it's really this balancing act, right, between demand and supply. On one hand, demand and asking consumers to conserve in the short term. We see that in drought, it's achievable in a shorter term, in a shorter amount of time we can ask. But it does have impacts on our customers. But increasing supply, there's a few ways that we can go about it with recycled and with maximizing our supplemental supply. But emergency supply projects are much longer term, as Paul will talk about later in the presentation. And so the ways in which we go about drought response kind of combine both efforts. And our water shortage contingency plan is a roadmap that we use in order to actually include operational and conservation actions with customers. So the water shortage contingency plan, it was revised after the last drought in 2021. It was first developed in the 1985, 92 or so timeline. After that drought was pretty severe, looking back at water shortage levels and what made sense on how, when to call for conservation from customers. And it's really, it's a roadmap for calling for those conservation actions. So as the reservoirs are drawn down to levels that are lower and lower, it triggers more restrictive actions. And it's a plan that all agencies now are required to have across California. It was required for the first time in 2020 for the Urban Water Management Plan, but we've had on the books kind of this plan since the early 90s. So after 2021, we developed a new plan that was based on more reservoir levels that we saw based on the 37 years of data, and what made sense on occurrences of where, how low we get and when does it make most sense to call for certain conservation levels without being too restrictive. So we developed 6 levels, and these are all based on local storage. So 75% of our supply is local storage, and it's a good indicator of not only our supply, but also usually hydrologic conditions for both ourselves and the Russian River. And it gives us a guiding roadmap on when to take action. It's not set in stone, but gives the board and staff a direction when the time comes to make those calls. So looking at the shortage levels that you can see on the tables, the first 2 are voluntary, so calling for 10% and 20%. Those are primarily calling for 10 and 20% of conservation from our customers using the rules that we already have in place. So the rules that, or the water rules that you see on our website, that we ask customers to only irrigate twice a week and drip irrigation only 3 times a week. And so really just putting out more messaging around dry conditions. As you move into the lower, the the drier conditions, that's when it turns to mandatory and there's more enforcement that comes with it. And that's where we limit more irrigation. We limit irrigation to 1 day a week at one point. And all of these, as you can see, are rarely hit. I think the 70,000 was one of the most challenging levels to develop because it seemed very high, right? For April 1st, it seemed like how can we develop it? But as you can see, we only hit it a third of the time. So usually it ends up being a good indicator that we're actually entering dry conditions going into the summer months.
And I would say, hitting your initial drought trigger 30% of the time, to me, supports the need to increase your supply or bring down your demand or in combination. Because, for your community, once every 3 years is a lot. So that's going to be a nice kind of benefit of our project. So we move forward, that number is going to dramatically go down, the frequency of that occurrence.
And the timing of, yeah.
Lucy, one other
Yeah.
point on I believe we also did, so these droughts have a big impact on our revenues, particularly as we start to go into mandatory reductions.
Right.
So I believe with our last rate structure, we also included drought rates
Yes.
to account for the losses that we might suffer with these restrictions, which I think is also a really important drought planning tool. So
Yes.
something that should also be emphasized.
Mhm.
Keep in mind, though, that those conditions were in place since I've been on the board. There've
Were
been
they?
drought structure. There's an issue about 218, but yes, they were.
The timing of the triggers, the triggers are set for April 1st. April 1st is the date that we see is significant from a water supply perspective because we've reached almost 88% of our rainfall by April 1st. And so we have a good outlook on supply conditions. We're not expecting to receive much more rainfall at that point. We can see what the project where we'll be come October 1st, where we are basically through that year. And this also allows us to implement those actions ahead of the summer months, which is shown on this chart. That the coloring is very hard to see, but the peak demand months actually occur during our summer, right? Our irrigation. And so if we're able to enact the conservation ahead of that time period, we actually get the most bang for the buck, and we're able to get messaging out early enough. We're able to work with our customers in order to get the biggest return on conserving levels during a dry period. And so just showing again the shortage action levels, and this is the average, our average storage throughout the year. So this is the last 38 years or so of our reservoir storage, the line on the chart showing that typically we're not hitting a storage, we're not hitting a trigger. So it is below that, but it allows us to make a decision going forward and communicate with our customers early enough so that we can get the messaging out about dry conditions.
The top on the y-axis is 80,000. Is that what the
Yes,
I
that
can't
would
quite read
be
it.
full capacity. Yeah.
When we were developing this, and then when we got into strategic water supply assessment, we noticed, it's maybe intuitive to some, but that you can't double count, meaning as we get more successful in reducing our baseline demand with conservation water efficiency activities, the marginal decrease you can expect during a drought decreases. Because, right, if everyone's operating very tight, for example, if we didn't have lawns, no one can turn their sprinklers, that sort of thing. So it just changes the thinking of the big dramatic drop, but you benefit, of course, because your baseline's, lower to begin with.
Yeah, you lose the quantums.
Right.
It's like when the 7-gallon toilets were switched to the 3s. That's a big step in internal water usage. and the 3s to the 1.5s.
Yeah.
So again, a big quantum leap.
Yeah, the elasticity of demand is changed.
Yeah, it's hardening in their
Mhm.
term. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's getting harder and harder. Although I believe, and maybe Phil and you guys know this, it seems to me that when we ask for those reductions, we get them.
Yeah.
The voluntary reductions are pretty effective.
Yeah, we had a good response, certainly in the last drought from our customers, and their effort was greatly appreciated through that time. Yeah.
Yep.
So the water shortage contingency plan, it exists, it provides our guidance. This now, and we looked at a simulation of that effect of that water shortage contingency plan across a 4-year drought. And it showed in the drought, it might save somewhere in the region of 10 to 12,000 acre feet of water, by the end of the 4 years, assuming certain success factors in reaching our customers. So now we're turning to sort of, we've talked a lot about the demand side, a little bit about operations. Now, what can we do in terms of supply? And there's a limit, obviously. We looked at temporary emergency desalination at the last plant. This is sort of a rapid deployment concept where you're going to go out and try to rent containers full of equipment, RO equipment, membrane equipment for the pretreatment, and essentially build these sort of Lego style little plants. As you can imagine, these aren't waiting on the shelf at Walmart for us to go pick up. They're pretty rare, and they're used all over the world, and where they may be in the world at the time that you need them. I mean, there's a good chance it's the Middle East, because for large construction projects out there, they need water for concrete mixing, and there's no local water other than the salt water. So they bring in a couple of these units, and one is for the water supply for the construction crew, and then for mixing concrete and things like that. So, and then they'll sit idle for a number of years. So sometimes these are available, sometimes they're not. Generally speaking, it's highly uncertain what you're going to get, and that leads to the uncertainty of the yield that you're going to be able to produce. Is dependent on how many of these units that you can find, and
the cost,
whether you typically the cost to purchase them is about almost the same year as a 1.5 or 1 year lease. So, but then what do you do having purchased them with these units? Because they can't sit idle. They're like any desal plant. They really need to operate. So you're essentially refurbishing them each time you're going to use them. So in 2021, we did look at this. The raw cost that we came up with at the time with no contingencies was somewhere in the region of $35 million. And this was just for a 12-month lease. The schedule we were hoping for was somewhere in the region of 12 to 18 months. Again, fairly ambitious considering even in an emergency set of conditions, you don't get to sort of just wave a magic wand. There's still some environmental challenges that you need to sort through. Some of the more practical considerations, we're siting this facility down at Pelican. There are no PG&E facilities to support a desalination plant, and it takes a long time to get PG&E to install those facilities. So you're looking at generators, and in our case, transformers as well, because the equipment we were looking at was on a different duty cycle than the United States uses. So it was going to be complicated, to say the least, to try to provide power for these units. And then I said permitting time frame was very uncertain. And we don't at the district have operating experience with desalination facilities. Yes, we've run a pilot plant for a year, but it's a bit of a different animal when you're looking at these containerized facilities. So likely we'd need some kind of contract operations. And then, as I think everyone's aware, there's a ballot measure regarding desalination. And of course, during the emergency, you're sort of, okay, well, sue me, but we need water, right? So is that the choice that we really want to put ourselves in? Anyway, long story short, we looked at it the last drought, and we didn't carry it forward. It's just a great deal of uncertainty around what you'd be able to achieve with temporary emergency or rapid deployment desalination facility.
Plus, if you put the PG&E in, then you pay standby.
Yeah.
Which can be close to what the cost of operation is.
Yeah.
It seems to me too, as I recall, there were a fair number of fly-by-night shady operators pitching systems.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few Zoom calls with, UAE folks representing different equipment vendors out there.
Anything you want, anytime you want it.
As long as you have the money. And
Yep.
there was a very amusing headline in the IJ, you may recall, back at the time when that we were looking at desal because the Saudi prince was looking at using desal for his facility. So we were competing apparently with that sort of competition.
We lost out.
I can imagine, yes. Our oil production's not quite enough to match up.
Right. Okay, so what else were we looking at was the emergency intertie to the East Bay. And, this has a long history in Marin, right? It was successfully done in the 70s. They just sort of were able to lay the pipe on the deck of the bridge, and they were able to get it done very quickly. And for us, we're looking at the same thing. It's a pipeline across the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge, which, as I say, it sounds so easy. But as we'll see in a moment, maybe not quite so much. The idea was that we would transfer water on the open market and move that water as needed through different jurisdictions to get it over to Marin. We were thinking at the time that 10,000 acre feet seemed like a reasonable number to try to achieve, though as we got into it, the actual yield would have been substantially less. And we'll see a little bit why. The schedule we were working on, and it looked like we would be able to meet, was about 18 months from sort of start to finish. So we started in early, I think it was maybe late 2020 on this project, early 2021, and we were looking at having it in place by summer of 2022. The idea was then, this is overhead, is the routing that we were looking at somewhere in Richmond on one side, and moving that water across the bridge to Pelican Way, where there'd be tanks and pumps, and then we'd have to integrate that water into our system, which you kind of see that loop going up Anderson, up Francisco, and then down Anderson to get into our system. On bridge work involved just a number of different categories. I guess I'm not going to go through all of them, but each one of these has specialist sort of requirements associated with it. Most importantly for us was, at the time, was really fortuitous that Caltrans was doing a lot of work on that bridge. And our project, even large as it was, is a change order for Caltrans. At some point in the process, we were getting ready, and the Bay Area Transportation Authority came to us as well. We need to do a strengthening project. We're going to replace a number, I think it was 32 or so high strength rivets to replace them with high strength bolts. And it was $7 million and it was just for our project. So that was our portion of that cost. So still significant costs for us. For those guys, this was change orders. Now, that's not likely to be the case were we to show up in another drought. In addition to the on-bridge work, on both sides of the bridge, we had impacts. The long pipeline that you saw going up Francisco was concerning to the city of San Rafael. It's a fairly heavily trafficked area, and there had been a number of projects planned, from fiber optic to different projects on that area, and we were going to be adding to the congestion in that area. On the Richmond side, of course, we needed a fairly sizable pump station, so we were looking at purchasing property. We'd install this pump station, and of course, you'd be having impacts because it's sort of right on the edge of a neighborhood area in Richmond there. And so those community impacts, of course, lead to costly mitigation measures. And that's where we found ourselves at the last outing.
Paul, was there a pump station somewhere around there in 76, 77?
Yes, there was.
So a lot of that infrastructure was put in and then taken out.
It was removed, yeah. Yep. And then, even though we were in an emergency, and the board had declared a water supply emergency, and generally the state of California by this time was recognizing drought in a number of different places, there's still work that we need to do in order to comply with environmental regulations, and there was quite a bit of it. On the federal highway transportation side, you heard earlier today about consultation processes with tribal communities. The same was true for this project on both sides of the bridge. BCDC, the Bay Conservation and Development folks, they were just getting warmed up. Even though we were in an emergency and really desperately needing to get this project done with a relatively light touch. I mean, it's a pipeline. It's not significant facilities. It's a temporary impacts. They were talking public hearings, to try to get this project. We were desperately trying to get this project approved. So the permitting process, the environmental process, all of it was just very, very challenging. And to sort of give you a flavor of that challenge, this slide has 21 different groups and agencies. All but one of them would we need to have some sort of an arrangement with. So not an insignificant task. So that's just the construction aspect of the project. Putting the water into the pipe was a different matter. So this is, thinking about how do we get this water, and in the drought, certainly then, there was a lot of competition. The water was limited. We found water. We were able to go out and we found different agencies willing to talk to us and sell us water. But because we were kind of out of the gate first. Nice thing about our system is, in one respect, it hurts us. We go into the drought first, but we kind of fill up first as well. So having gone in first, we're almost first in line. I think Santa Clara beat us to the punch, but we were pretty much first in line. But what we find out after a few discussions was the phone calls are a little bit slower to come back. Someone else has cut in front of us.
Paul, are there brokers for this sort of thing, or do you just work directly with all the different wholesalers?
There are, I don't know if there are brokers. There are legal firms that work on contracts, and they know people who have sold water in the past, and they can kind of move you and put you in touch with these different folks. I don't know if that's their exclusive business. I'd have to take
We were working with an irrigation district that was effectively acting as a broker to their member ranchers,
Yes.
member farmers. So it was kind of a broker concept in that way.
Yeah.
I think it's important too to remember that in 76, even though the water was wheeled by East Bay Mud, they transported the water. They didn't supply the water. The water came from Metropolitan Water District, Southern California. So it's different than people think that, and MWD, this water group in LA, which is a major player, is buying water all through the Central Valley in the north.
There's a nice slide that gets into the complexity of.
Yeah, it's tricky. The advantage, of course, is that it's in a different watershed. The water's coming. I mean, there's disadvantages of that too, but the obvious advantage is that they're impacted differently by the same drought as we are.
Yes, although the delta ultimately is the conveyance for this water largely, and the stronger, more severe the drought, the higher the sort of delta tax. In other words, you've got to leave some of that water behind. They call it carriage water, and it can be as much as 30% or so of your total that you're bringing in. Anyway, the water's got to travel these long distances, typically down the Sacramento River, and then get pulled out. The main message is here that ultimately it's not certain whether you're going to be able to successfully purchase the water. And as we'll see in a minute, once you've purchased that water, it's challenging to convey the water. And so that's what this chart, this cartoon tries to show, with the delta there up top. So assuming we've made a successful transaction with a willing seller and purchased water, and we've convinced somebody to pull out the water from the delta. So that's either the state or it's Contra Costa to pull the water out. We've still got to move the water. Now it can be transferred, but it's still got to transfer it physically. So that means in our case, it was moving the water from the delta all the way down to the South Bay San Luis Reservoir, which is run by Santa Clara. And then from there, they, store it. They would then exchange with Milpitas, who would exchange with SFPUC, who would exchange with Hayward, who would then exchange with East Bay Mud.
Easy.
So
I know for many of them,
So this,
You don't have the.
these
Mhm.
folks are all, these folks are all used to this transfer process, right? They've done it, you know, the big guys, we haven't. So we were kind of new and learning our way. But what it became clear as we were talking to them was they wanted to even test this. They've sort of got it, but this whole notion of moving the water in this way to East Bay Mud in an emergency, they hadn't done. So, took them 7 years to get that agreement. We were trying to do it in 4 months. These were the agreements that we would have to have come up with to make that transit route successful. So it was a very challenging task ahead of us, and you know, thankfully it rained.
And needless to say, none of them are motivated to help,
Right. Yeah, I mean,
except in the global sense.
yeah, we had some fantastic, not to, help from a number of agencies, and you know, I would call out Santa Clara, who, as you know, their main reservoir is down to 10% capacity. They're working on structural issues. They were willing to help us in this process to the extent that they can. SFPUC was very helpful. There were just a number of really helpful agencies through the process.
There are easier routes. in
Contra
the
Costa.
water, but for example, the large East Bay agency wanted San Francisco water, not Contra Costa water. Contra Costa is right next door. It would have been much easier, but instead to get San Francisco water, we had to do this.
Right.
Do this loop. So it just speaks to you're kind of where you're cap in hand.
Yep.
As you're having these discussions.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Right.
also much saltier Contra Costa water than.
Right.
So Molly's reminder, Contra Costa, of course, was extremely helpful to us through
Yeah.
this process.
Super.
Yes.
So then just thinking about the costs, back then, we were thinking sort of a raw construction cost of around $111 million to get the pipe across the bridge. We look at that today, we'd escalate it, we'd add another 17 million or so to it. As you know, East Bay Mud had certain conditions, and we'll show that in a second. So there's an allowance that we're putting in for that. We know, I talked about mitigation requirements in the city of Richmond that were going to be quite costly. So there's some mitigation for that. Similarly, BCDC. And then, of course, we're no longer a part of the change order on Caltrans. We're paying our own freight for police escorts, lane closures, and those sorts of things. So we've had allowances for that. And then we had, so the raw 111 million, there's no contingencies attached to that. We were just going. I mean, cost was almost irrelevant, right? This pipeline needed to be built. So adding in some soft costs for that, we're at a couple hundred, we've doubled the cost of it.
And the part you left out is, and then it rained.
And then it rained.
Mhm.
So that was the cost issue. This is just, I was going to try to call out some of the East Bay Mud, the more sort of stringent East Bay Mud principles that they adopted as a board in relation to this project. But frankly, they're all very, very challenging for us. There's some here in red, no impact to East Bay Mud's ability to prioritize the purchase of water. So we can't buy water that they're interested in. Anyway, you can take a look at this if you want to. I don't want to dwell on it, but these were very, very, very difficult. So then maybe our last option to think about, if we haven't moved forward on a conveyance project, for example, maybe there's a way to accelerate it. If the drought happened tomorrow, we declare an emergency, and that allows us to shortcut certain environmental aspects, which does reduce the amount of time. Again, you still have to physically construct it. You still have to buy the steel. You still have to find the switchgear for the pump station and the pump. So there's at least a year-long supply chain.
Have we used up our credit yet on the steel?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes, we did.
We pre-purchased the steel for the inner liner of the pipe.
Right.
The pipe has concrete on the outside, concrete on the inside, and a steel shell
Right.
that actually holds the pressure.
So that's just a sort of an aside, not something we looked at in the last drought, but it's something I think we would, if the drought showed up tomorrow, we would be talking about. And then in terms of other, if there really are no ideas, no other projects going on, there's potentially emergency trucking of water. Now, this is disaster, right? Typically where you see this sort of approach, for 10 gallons a person, we're looking at 300, 400 truckloads a day. And just trying to think through the logistics of finding that number of trucks even though some trucks can make multiple, trips. It's logistically infeasible and not something that we would want to plan for.
Water's heavy and,
Right.
people talk about water being cheap as dirt. Well, try to buy dirt versus water. Dirt's a lot more expensive than water. And one of my poker friends who has now died, but spent over $1 million in the 70s per year trucking water in for his plants. I don't know where it came from, but someplace up north. Someone must have had a spring or something. And, it didn't bother him at all. It was like, whatever. But those kind of numbers, trucking water is very expensive.
So summary, we've got some operational things we can do to stretch the water supply. The water shortage contingency plan will help us do that somewhat. In terms of emergency drought projects, it's there. I wouldn't say any of these are particularly desirable, but we've described today what we think are perhaps the options that might be available to us.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Questions?
Just thank you, Paul and Lucy. I hope with all the effort that's going into the integrated water supply roadmap, these are not considerations that we're going to have to be thinking about going forward.
Let's hope.
I had a question. I looked at this Forever Pure. It was like a modular desal unit. I don't know if you've heard of them. I called them a couple weeks ago to get some pricing. They do like they have like a pricing for 1 million gallons per day. And I was just curious. I wondered if you'd heard of that. And that's sort of the kind of thing you were looking at when you were talking in the beginning about sort of modular or very small scale desal. I haven't heard back from them, but I was going to follow up and just was curious. They will apparently give you, they'll sort of loan this to you free of charge. Of course, that doesn't account for costs for energy, but you can get some idea of how it would work.
Yeah, I have not heard of Forever Pure. I mean, we have looked at ship-mounted desal barges. There's been over the years a number of different variations on desal. When you're looking at, generally speaking, RO systems it would be interesting to look at. If you could send me the link, I'd be happy to do it. But with RO, there's no getting out of jail free. You've got to have the pre-treatment, the intake system, the disposal of the brine system.
Permits.
Yeah, the way to integrate the water into the system.
The energy, the power.
Yeah, it's a part of it, so it's interesting from that perspective.
It was my reference to fly-by-nights. I'm not criticizing that company, but that was what I was talking about, is a lot of people came out of the woodwork. And of course, the other thing that Paul mentioned, which is critical, is when you need it, so does everybody else. So it's exactly backwards. When you need it, you can't get it unless you want to pay. And even then, you can imagine the behind the scenes stuff of, if you start dealing with Saudi Arabia or somebody in competition, right? Who says 10 times more? Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you for the presentation. I think this is really important as, emergencies come up and have and will. It seems like our conveyance approach, if that is a direction we move forward with, will help significantly in this regard. And one thing I love about that approach is that it has phased aspects to it that can move in over time, such that if an emergency happens, we could possibly accelerate it. And I'm wondering if the intertie across the bridge could also have a phased approach to it, if there's anything we could do to begin that, or if really what you're saying is, given all the complexities and all the different agencies, that's not a viable approach. I can't quite tell. If it's not a viable, we should probably take it off of one of the emergency options. But if it is, maybe there are ways that we can begin either the conversations or the contracts or the relationships and keep that moving. But my sense is that's not going to be top priority. The top priority is going to be the work that Carrie's doing and that we're doing to help with water efficiency. And what I'd love to see in our next review of that side of it is, turning it around and looking at how long will our water last? Like, how much time do we have? And at what point do these triggers and these savings kick in such that we can make it until the next winter, or we can make it a year? Do we have a 2-year supply or a 3-year supply? And how do we measure the water efficiency efforts that we'll be relying on our customers to implement? How can we measure the impact of how much time we have to make it? So I think it's great. And then if you map on top of that, the Nicasio spillway gate and other improvements that we have, truly, how much time do we have when the emergency kicks in? And then that'll give us a better sense of giving you feedback on 10% or 20% or 30% or where those map in. So each of those triggers, how much time does that buy us? Does that make sense, Gary?
I'm not sure I fully grasp what you're saying, but I think you want to know how the.
If we don't do anything, we'll run out of water in 2 years.
Right. So.
Or 2.2 years, or whatever the exact number is.
So you would like.
If we start to save 10%, how many more months does that give us? If we save 30%, does that give us until the next winter? And it really depends on when the savings start. So it's on a month by month basis. Does that make sense? I think that'll help us get a sense of when we want to kick in some of these water efficiency triggers.
Yeah, just keep in mind, the hard part is deciding when are we in drought? That's the tricky part. I was very suspicious of these triggers when we started all this. And I was shocked at how accurate they were, the 40,000 acre feet and all that. They were right on. So somebody had done some very good thinking back. And one thing that comes to mind, and I know you have nothing else to do, but it seems to me we should document this in a report, because just like getting a PhD, the paths that don't work need to be ID'd too and documented so that they don't start down the path again saying, oh, this is an interesting idea. So, to the extent you can, I think this would also be an excellent AWWA paper. They would eat this up, especially the part about the interaction between the water agencies. The complexity of those things. And they, even changing boards, right? It changes the philosophy, perhaps. I'm talking about our board, but I'm talking about their boards. You can't predict what's going to happen. Somebody says, never. And the one thing you didn't mention was we had a lot of pressure about the use of the water. I have a house in Point Richmond, and I'm fairly well tuned to the politics there, but it was a lot of pushback of the folks on that side. One of along that same line of stories, AT&T bought a house about 10 down from our house, and they were converting it into a large scale mega cell phone antenna. A regular house, but it would be a cell phone for providing the Tiburon Peninsula. Where I live, we have no cell phone, essentially, and which is shocking to most people. But our cell phone is on the internet, not on the regular cell phone. I had my own cell tower for years. And it's just heated, to say the least, between that side and this side. A lot of complicating factors. I think that one, you guys handled it well, but I think it was heading towards a real issue that would have not gone down smoothly. Public comment?
Yes, there are two, Phil Sauter and Ed Jameson, please.
Thanks very much for the presentation. When it went online yesterday, I looked at it and it was really kind of scary looking through some of those slides. I look at the things that the board is considering over the past year or two, and I'm amazed at the amount of productivity and the number of things that have gotten through. Can you imagine being tangled up in a situation like this and the amount of time that would be spent and the amount of bandwidth that would be lost? I think Ben put it really well that by reducing demand regularly, an ounce of prevention is really worth a ton of cure in this case. it seems to me that we really want to avoid even these voluntary, let alone the mandatory temporary reductions. If we can stay out of that business, it would be great. I think as Jed said, I think he said it better than I did. It would be good to look at those triggers and at the number of instances when they come into play, and then figure out how often those triggers would be hit if we were to lower our daily demand permanently by 1 million gallons a day. And then look at it again. What if we hit 2 million gallons a day savings, or 3 million or 4 million? Is there a sweet spot where we could get a savings that would really avoid hitting those triggers, maybe cut them down to by 50%? So I would suggest if we could look at that as Jed suggested, or in another way, what would happen? And if we could find that sweet spot. And we might say, if we find that spot, it might be worthwhile spending like crazy to hit that permanent daily reduction of 1 or 2 million gallons. Thank you.
Mr. Jameson, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
This was another outstanding presentation by our Voices of Experience. I clearly recollect what you folks went through back in 2021. Thanks, Paul and Lucy.
Thank you, Ed.
There are no further speakers.
Okay, cool. Our next meeting is on March 25 at 9:30. The days are moving around a little bit to match other schedules. That's why the dates, it isn't uniform between spacing. That should settle down pretty soon. So with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.